Namaskar. Have you heard of vitamin B12? I'm sure you have. Most of you may also have been prescribed, a blood test, and probably even later prescribed some pills, some artificial supplements for B12 to take. And that is because B12 is indeed a very important ingredient. What it does in the body is it helps purify the blood, it helps keep the nerve cells healthy, and it also has a role in the making of DNA itself, the fundamental genetic material within the nuclei of every cell in our body. Apparently, B12 in very, very, very minute, even trace amounts, is useful in keeping that activity going in a healthy way. Now, have you heard the next thing about B12? And that is that it is normally found deficient in vegetarians. Have you heard that? This is such a common thing that I'm sure many of you may have heard of it. If not, a simple search on Google will tell you this. The top 100 listings on Google will tell you this exact same statement, It's almost like a religious scripture which is being repeated by everyone. And then after a point of time, people have stopped doing their independent inquiry about it. And that statement is that vegetarians are always in danger of having low B12, and that is because in nature plants do not make B12. They are not a source. They do not synthesize it. It's only available from animal meat, and therefore, etc., etc. You have to eat meat, or you have to take these artificial supplements. I would like to question that. My inquiry is really triggered by this statement, and that is, how can we make such a generalized assumption? In the West, it's easy because they think the whole world eats meat, and that's their only source, so they don't even bother about doing the research, which is not part of their food growing and food consuming culture. But in India, or in many parts of Asia, how can we accept this statement that for thousands and thousands of years, most of us who are vegetarians, even the non-vegetarians here, eat non-vegetarian only once or twice a month. Earlier it was even less. Even in the villages around here, more than 50% may say they eat meat, which is true. But if you ask them how often, it is not like the Western culture of having, pigs for breakfast and cows for lunch and, a lamb for dinner. No, here they will, slaughter a goat once in 5 months and then share that, among 10 families. Or they will slaughter their own, hens, which they keep, poultry they keep at home, probably once in 2 months. That's the way it is. Anyway, now for a vegetarian like me, where vegetarianism as not just as a bodily, physical philosophy of health, but as a more spiritual philosophy of not killing, of not doing harm, of having compassion for every creature on earth, that runs so deep in us. Do you think for centuries and centuries and centuries we have been deficient in B12? Somehow I wanted to question that. So how is B12 manufactured in nature? How do we get it? Yes, it is true that plants and animals do not synthesize it. And human beings, we do not synthesize it. This is made by bacteria. There are millions of types of bacteria, and there are many dozens of varieties of bacteria which exist in the soil, in the water, in nature, which are capable of producing vitamin B12. Many of these bacteria live in close proximity to the plants, like the plant in this farm, and they stay in close proximity, having a symbiotic relationship with the roots of these plants. But yet the plants apparently do not absorb enough of this, or they do not absorb any of this because they do not need it. That is the story so far. But let us question that too later. Now, if these bacteria is the source of the only source of vitamin B12, and we are saying that plants do not need it, so they don't have it, how about the grazing animals, the herbivores, the cows, the goats, the sheep, the deer, the rabbit, Do they need vitamin B12? Yes. Yes, our research says it is a critical element even for the animals. If so, where do my cows and goats and lambs and sheep and rabbits get their vitamin B12? Because they are eating plants, and plants are not a source of B12. Isn't that a valid question? Now, apparently, this question, if we delve into it deeply, can answer the other question about humans and vegetarians and how they have maintained a very good level of B12 without creating a furor or some kind of false crisis. This bacteria, which is there very close to the soil surface also, and to the surface of the plants themselves, many of them are in close proximity to the stalks to the stem of the plants, even to the leaves, and certainly to the roots. And therefore, when the grazing animals, they graze this grass, and then when they are chewing without chlorinating it, without washing it, without bleaching it with some chemicals, thank God. So when they eat this, they get a lot of these bacteria naturally. And this bacteria, it goes and settles down in their stomach and small intestines. And there they go to work and produce the B12, all the B12 necessary for these grazing animals. And that B12, after it is used, even as it is being used by the body, a larger amount of it is stored in their muscles. And therefore, they say meat-eating people can get it naturally from the animal meat. That is true. But the animals whose meat you are eating, they do not get it from eating other meat. They get it from plant sources, but close to the plant, the bacteria who are living in very close proximity to the plants. Now, it is not just the soil, but the entire environment of a place, of a natural place, like this for instance, it is rich in bacteria which can supply vitamin B12. Not only the soil beneath this grass here, but also a source of water. For instance, my source of water is this well, which the water here rests on the ground soil about 15 to 20 feet below. That's as high, my water table is quite high. We get water at just 15 feet here. Now this water is settled on rocks and stones and gravel and sand and mud. So it gets filtered in its own natural way in this process, but at the same time a lot of useful minerals and bacteria. It is rich in minerals, and bacteria thrive in this water. When we say bacteria, we have to pause for a minute and think, what is our response from here to this word? Words have very deep psychological responses. Cancer, when you hear that, something happens. There is a physiological change and a psychological change that is happening when we hear these words. Unfortunately, modern science has made many useful things which are part of nature as very scary words, and bacteria is one of them. Even though many of us know intellectually, and for those who don't, let me share with you that we have 1 million bacteria in our body. Without them, we would not survive. Bacteria are very useful organisms. There are hundreds of thousands of types of microbes, which if they weren't present, our cells would not be able to do their work, our intestines would not be able to do their work. In fact, if we take a human intestine or any animal intestine and actually remove each and every bacteria from it, I don't know if it's possible, but if we did it, it will not be an intestine. It is that rich with bacteria. So, yes, there are places where the water is unclean and it has to be filtered. Yes, there are places where there is an imbalance and the soil is not healthy. It is very important to educate people to filter that water and how to consume it. And there we come to these two types of filtrations. This well which I just told you about and its natural filtration system can be copied at home. And it used to be done in all our villages. Even the pots, the clay pots that you keep water in, the clay itself is a source of, it absorbs many of the physical impurities present in the water while keeping the bacteria there, useful bacteria for us. There are sometimes harmful bacteria. It is a fact that there are some harmful bacteria which cause certain diseases. We call them waterborne diseases, and they can be checked for. And they do not happen all over the place at the same time. They happen at certain select places, and that is what human ingenuity can be used for, to detect those places and to help bring back that water source, bring back that soil source to its natural state of health. Rather than find that because there are some bacteria which cause waterborne diseases, the whole world must now use chlorine and we must all consume chlorinated water. Now, chlorinated water, apart from killing all the bacteria, even the useful ones, and most are useful, and in most places there is not an imbalance. Instead of studying this, we go for this one solution fits all, one pill fits all, and we chlorinate our water. And we do it to such an extent that that chlorine itself is a cause for further diseases and problems. You got rid of some imaginary bacteria by using chlorine. Where will you and how will you get rid of the effects of chlorine on your system? Another interesting research which I found was about RO, the new water filtration system. I'll put a link of that in the description if you want to read it. It's a recent study done in Mumbai by some scientists, and they took a sample and they took people who use RO water and who don't use RO water. They tried to select the people who were generally of the same category, same age group, gender, health-wise, etc., etc. And then over a period of time when they studied, the people who used RO water had 75% higher chance of deficiency of B12 rather than the people who did not use RO water. So this is a very basic lesson about source of B12. It's available in bacteria. Bacteria are very useful things. And if we cleanse ourselves of this wrong thought that soil is dirty, earth is dirty, anything natural is dirty, unless we clean it in a laboratory with chemicals, that is what needs cleansing. So this then concludes part one of our inquiry, and the answer to that question about how our vegetarians, at least in this part of the world, for centuries and centuries and centuries, got their proper intake of B12. This is the answer, that they lived close to nature. They lived within the cycle of nature, where there is a balance of all types of microbes. And because they lived in that balance and did not, to put it in modern language, sanitize things to the extent that they were useless, the useful microbes found their way through their food cycle and water cycle into their stomachs and small intestines, just like with the cows and the goats. And these bacteria then produce the necessary B12 in the system of human bodies also. And to understand is just to live accordingly. And that is enough. We do not need anything more for B12. Now we have second part of our inquiry. Now let us go back to that question about whether plants actually do not have any B12 at all. Now very interesting research has been done which shows that plants, trees and crops which have been nourished in a natural way with cow dung, with animal dung, which is also called farmyard manure, actually contain some B12. Because this manure contains a rich quantity of useful bacteria, among them also bacteria which produce vitamin B12. And being in such close proximity to the roots, some B12 actually gets into the plants too. Yes, it does. And therefore, when the modern scientists, probably working in, not probably, almost certainly working in Western laboratories where farmyard manure is not used at all for more than 40 years, where only chemical fertilizers are used. When they tested those plants, obviously they would have found that B12 is not there. And then they made this conclusion. And from that lab comes a report. And science, unfortunately, it has become like the organized religion of old, Someone in Vatican says something, everyone follows the same. It's like that. One laboratory, one scientific institution in the West says it, and everyone is repeating. Please do the Google search again. They repeat the same words, parrot it, without any independent inquiry that plants do not have B12 at all. I found another research in 1994 done in Switzerland exactly on this premise. In that experiment, they took equal amounts of plants, and one half they treated with chemical fertilizers, and the other they used farmyard manure and cow dung. And guess what they found? They found that the vitamin B12 quantity, which was already there actually, trace elements, they increased, threefold to 15-fold in spinach and barley. So this is a source of a line of inquiry which can continue. I'm going to be doing it here, taking some of my plant produce, because I do natural farming using only cow manure, and I'm going to take it to the labs and check if that is possible. Why don't you also, if many of you are in places where there is some natural farming, organic farming going on, please find out, do these tests, and if you get some results, please share it to me on my email. I would like to pursue this further, not to prove anyone wrong. Please, that's not the thing. I do not like this East versus West and other things. The point is, unfortunately, modern science and the pace at which we are going, and the modern student who is attending, medical school or any science college, they are not. The system hardly encourages them to think and inquire and question. They are overloaded with books. They have to study. They have assignments. They have, targets. And then they've taken so much loan that they're just thinking of getting the degree, getting out, starting to earn so that they can repay that loan. It's a very stressful situation. So I don't blame them. But if you feel some of this is interesting, I'll put as many links as I can in the description for those of you who are interested in pursuing this reading. Please share it with your friends, especially with your physicians, and make this point to them that this can be a very good source of B12, naturally grown plants and vegetables. And also, if we do not excessively treat our water from streams, from flowing streams, from open wells which are kept neat and clean, like we do, obviously, we are interested in our health. And to get rid of this obsession that anything natural which comes from the forest is dirty, and anything cemented, asphalted, chlorinated, is plasticized, is good for us. By the way, another good source is naturally yogurt, dahi, for us, which is of course animal product, so it is. But the act of fermentation introduces many of these bacteria which are useful. Similarly, the act of fermentation in other things too. The act of fermentation in for instance, amboli, which we eat in Maharashtra, or dosa and idli, which are eaten in the south. The natural fermentation process, of rice and urad dal, the combination we soak in water and keep it overnight, that natural fermentation also introduces very useful bacteria which produce B12. And therefore, a study in 80s itself, I was told by area sales manager of Glaxo at that time, that in South India, B12 deficiency is very less. And he was unhappy that the tablets didn't sell well there. Interesting point to think about. Now, the same fact about organic and inorganic fertilizer to plants is also related indirectly to meat-eating people having B12 deficiency. It's very interesting, because one question, obvious question we may have it, a meat-eating person, especially in the West, who eats meat every day, why is he having B12 deficiency? And that is because he's eating the meat not from animals who are grazing. He's eating the meat from farms where the animals, whether cows or pigs, they do not graze, they do not eat natural food. They are fed artificial food from bags made in other factories. That is the reason even those animals are deficient in B12. The animals whose meat are being eaten by you is itself deficient in B12. And that's why even non-vegetarians, meat-eating people in heavily meat-eating cultures like the West are also having B12 deficiency. If the herbivores get to graze naturally, they get enough intake of useful bacteria. And if those animals, if and when slaughtered and eaten by you, then you get a good source of B12. To come back to one last point, I was making about, this is not East versus West, and it's not a deliberate scam, or just that the way of inquiry, the way of education, the way of science has has got derailed somewhat, and it's good for all of us. I think science is healthiest and most alive when it's alive in all of us, rather than one guy does science like one religious head of, sitting somewhere, and then his word is scripture for all. And of course, we can have scientific guidance, like we can have scriptural guidance, but that guidance must come with a caveat that you have to find out for yourself also. I would like to end with this point. Some of us may be thinking, why go to all this trouble? I'm in a city anyway, I don't have natural source of water, why not just take the multivitamin tablet? Of course, if you're deficient, if there's no other source, take it. But what this line of inquiry is doing, I'm hoping that it will do by sharing this, is that it will trigger our own inquiry. So we will start looking around. It is our understanding which decides the way we live, our lifestyle, and the future plans that we make about where to go, even after your retirement, if you're my age, or if you're young and very smart and want to retire early. This kind of inquiry, if it goes on in your mind, can tell you a little bit and guide you on what kind of a life you want to lead. Because for me, there are two things in this. There is one way where nature has a way of providing us what we need in a virtuous cycle. From soil here to the plants, to the trees, to this water, and to the animals and to us. It is a virtuous cycle. If we and our lifestyles are such that we live within this cycle, I find that model more appealing. The other model is to break this cycle and then look for other artificial methods which are necessary. Why? Because we broke this cycle. So even though we may not be able to fully replenish this cycle in our lives where we are, I think this line of inquiry, it is not just about B12, it could be about many other things that are told to us. And it is towards that virtuous end, that I'm sharing this video. Because when I had this question in my mind, it looked like a very valid question. And I'm glad I did this inquiry and I was able to do that research because other people have shared some of the findings that they have done before me on the internet. And so I thought if someone else is there like me doing this research, my work should also benefit them. So it is in that spirit of coexistence, happy, healthy coexistence, that I share this. Please share any comments, any questions that you have, either on the public platform or on my email. Thank you. Stay healthy, stay happy. Namaskar.